We'll have a talk today about the mind. As I mentioned, there are three different minds. The superconscious mind in yoga is called Buddhi, B-U-D-D-H-I. And then there's the subconscious mind that sits between the superconscious and the conscious mind. The intellectual mind is called Manas. As far as yoga is concerned, their highest respect is for the higher mind, not high IQ in the lower mind. The yogic view on this is that the highest form of intelligence is pure consciousness. Pure consciousness is the field of the God force. It is a field of intelligence sitting underneath the atom. It's got the potential for any kind of creation, and it's infinitely intelligent. When that field moves, you start to get the first sign of creation, like an atom. But also, when pure consciousness moves, you get the first bubble of thought. So, yoga's view on thought is that intellectual thought and IQ are a form of constricted intelligence. To say that in a more expanded way, as far as yoga is concerned, anything that's a material object is already inferior energy. The most superior energy is Shiva, or potential movement, sitting in the form of pure consciousness. So, as far as yoga describes it, there's this ocean, there's this still ocean of Om. That still ocean contains all the potential for creation. As long as that ocean is not moving, that is the most expanded form of the Lord. The minute movement begins in that ocean, you start to go from unmanifest to manifest, meaning physical objects or thoughts. So any physical object is already an inferior form of the still and silent ocean of divinity. This is why when you go into deep meditation, when your mind becomes still, you're going back to that ocean. That is your expanded form. This is why if you go through this exercise I gave you, you constantly remind yourself that I am light living in this physical form. As long as you remind yourself of that, you are operating in expandedness. You'll see, there'll be no jealousy, there'll be no envy, there'll be no anxiety, as long as you remind yourself of expandedness. So coming back to the three minds, Buddhi is consciousness in its still form. So your highest mind, being the superconsciousness, is an ocean of stillness, and creativity just comes to it. Excuse me. For example, when they would ask Albert Einstein, where did your theory of relativity come from? He would say, nowhere. That nowhere is the superconscious mind. If they ask Pablo Picasso, where did this painting come from? It's usually an answer like, nowhere. It came in a flash. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was driving to Mexico City. He saw the full novel of 100 Years of Solitude flash before the windshield in a few seconds. He turned the car around, went back to his basement. It took him 18 months to translate that one flash of an idea into a book. So that's how far advanced the Buddhi mind is, because it can flash an entire novel on a windshield, and then your manas, the intellectual mind, may take 18 months to translate down into words and paper. So if you're lucky enough to have access to your Buddhi, then you're so far ahead of other humans, because most humans are operating at the level of manas, meaning IQ, and the intellectual mind. Even if you were to be able to access your subconscious mind, you would be ahead of thousands of people, because most people can't even access their subconscious. Examples of what would happen if you accessed your subconscious. Whenever you forget somebody's name or telephone number, that memory is in the subconscious. Whenever you're trying to access any creativity, anything from the past, problem solving, all of the solutions to problems are in the subconscious. Subconscious mind apparently has a power 34,000 times greater than manas, the intellectual mind. In other words, psychologists claim, or mind researchers claim, that the subconscious mind can process something like 35,000 bits of information per second, whereas the intellectual mind can simultaneously process about 8 bits of information. So you can see the relative power of the subconscious. How do you access buddhi in the subconscious? There's one key. The more you relax your brain, the more you're accessing the subconscious and the superconscious. Getting back to our old exercise, the more you visualize yourself as light living in this body, the more you disassociate with your ego, your first name, your last name, the freer you are to access the subconscious and the buddhi. Now, let's just analyze manas, or the intellectual mind. The intellectual mind is an offshoot. It's a tiny offshoot of pure consciousness, which is the original source of all thought. So even if you have this incredible IQ, you're the top student at MIT, yoga would still say that brilliant intellect is a tiny branch of buddhi, which is pure consciousness. I'm going to give you an example of how powerful buddhi is. I used to visit a lady guru in India. Her name is Sri Karunimaya. Karunimaya has a high school degree in literature. The Indian Space Agency called her to go into meditation and write down formula for rocket fuel. And it was done. Another example. There's a dentist in Bethesda, Maryland. He has a basement. He's a dentist. Technical blueprints are given to him, and these are unperfected inventions. This gentleman takes the blueprint, looks at it, goes into the basement, and empties out his mind. In the state of emptiness, the incomplete parts of the design come to him. He comes out of meditation and puts them down on paper. So he's a famous man because of this. A lot of organizations like the FBI use psychics to be able to spot a criminal or some criminal activity. Psychics go into silence, they relax the brain, and they start to access the buddhi, the advanced mind. So coming back to manas, manas is a constricted form of the highest mind. The intellectual mind thinks and then doubts its thought. So the nature of the intellectual mind is that it rambles on, it jumps from thought to thought, it often doubts its own thinking. The intellectual mind also has a very, very hard time being in the present moment. If you leave your mind alone, it will not reside in the present moment. Why? Because the minute you think, you're already either in the past or the future. So how can a mind that doesn't reside in the now be able to come up with solutions. The greatest solutions are right here in the now before you. Any creative person will tell you when they open themselves up, that's when the answers come. You can't open yourself up in the future or the past. I want to speak to you about the subconscious mind because it's very powerful. I'll give you some traits and characteristics of the subconscious mind. Number one, the subconscious mind is always working. It never goes to sleep. This is why if you need to travel tomorrow morning, so you have to get up at 5:30 a.m. to travel, if you simply remind yourself that you need to be up tomorrow morning at 5:30, chances are the subconscious will wake you up at 5:29. Many people have tried this. Or if you forget somebody's name or telephone number and you say, I'm just going to let the issue go. The minute the manas, the intellectual mind, lets it go, because you relax, the subconscious mind retrieves. Or you can also give your subconscious mind assignments. Right before you go to sleep, you can say to your subconscious, I need this person's name by tomorrow morning when I wake up. And then you physically fall asleep. The subconscious doesn't sleep. It ticks away like a computer all night, searching for the name of the person you're trying to remember. So know that your subconscious never sleeps. Another characteristic, subconscious mind has one foot in the unmanifest world, one foot in the manifest world. What that means is if you give your subconscious an assignment to influence the creative forces, it can do that. It'll take your orders in the manifest world and take your orders and commands to the ethereal world of the creative force. Subconscious can communicate with both worlds. The worlds of creation and the physical world that's already been created. So use it as a liaison. You use the subconscious as a liaison. Other characteristics of the subconscious. Subconscious takes every single one of your intellectual thoughts as a command. So every time you think, you are giving or passing down an order to the subconscious. This is why you should never really let go of the helm or steering wheel of your intellectual mind. Because the intellectual mind without consciousness or mindfulness is craziness. I'm going to explain that again. Thought without mindfulness is madness. Because, thought roaming around by itself is just uncontrolled energy. Do separate what I just said from creativity. Creativity comes from buddhi. Thought is just like bubbles of information about the past or the future, never about the now. So I'm going to explain that statement again. Rambling thought without mindfulness is madness. If you allow your mind to just roam, and if you decide to believe all of your scrambled thoughts, you will go mad. Because they have no direction typically, they're never about the moment. They usually contain anxiety about uncertainty. They usually contain some fear. This is why when you adopt a technique like meditation and you have fewer thoughts, you notice that you're smiling more. The reason you've been smiling more recently is because you're having fewer thoughts. The mind is emptier. Human beings are said to have, on the average, 60,000 bubbles of thought per day. And more than 90% are repetitive, and none of them are about the present moment. None of them. Coming back to the subconscious mind, the subconscious mind also doesn't care whether you issue a positive command or a negative command. So because it takes every thought as a command, you need to decide what you feed it. Whatever you feed it, it's going to take as a command. Literally. It has no preference. This is what's dangerous about the subconscious. Has no preference. That's why if you release the harness of your mind and it starts to give you negative information, subconscious is just listening, saying, yes ma'am, right away, right away. Even if you're thinking dangerous thoughts, it will do that. Subconscious mind understands images much more powerfully than words. So we talked about two techniques. One was positive affirmations, which are short statements in the present tense that you recite and rehearse with the subconscious. But much more powerful than that is visualization, where you close your eyes and you visualize being in a particular state, in a particular circumstance. The visualization, because it's full of images, is much more understandable by the subconscious. I'm now going to give you some techniques for influencing the subconscious mind. In other words, if the subconscious is compared to an iceberg, 7/8 of it is hidden from you, it's underwater. How do you influence this powerful tool that's 35,000 times stronger than the intellect? How do you influence it? Take down some techniques. Number one, goal setting. Every time you write down a goal, even a weekly or a daily goal, every time you write down a goal and you reach it, that is a signal to your subconscious that I have achieved one more victory. It could be as simple as going to the dry cleaners. It doesn't matter. Every time you write down a goal and you achieve it, the subconscious makes a check mark, like one more victory. This is why goal setting can do a lot for your self-confidence. Technique number two. Every time you visualize, hopefully good things, every time you visualize, your subconscious mind takes that visualization as utter reality. That's number two. Number three, positive statements, positive mental statements. They're called affirmations. Typically, the sentence should begin with the word I. The verb should end with ing. And the verb should be in the present tense. I am graduating from graduate school. Work in progress. Other techniques. If you have one real experience of the joy that you want to achieve, one real experience of where you want to wind up, sends a very powerful message to the subconscious that we're already getting there. So let's say you fancy a dress or a car. If you go to the car dealership and wrap your hands around the steering wheel and just smell the interior of the car, as far as the subconscious is concerned, even though you haven't bought it, that is one real experience of sitting in that car. That was a materialistic example. Take any other example. If you have 2 minutes of deep meditation, you will have already tasted pure consciousness. You'll never forget it. The experience you had a few days ago, you went much deeper than that. That's not something you're going to forget. It's imprinted in your mind. So this last technique was devising a technique to get yourself into one real experience of what you want to achieve. Just taste it once. Other means of influencing the subconscious mind. Every time you face fear head on and step beyond fear, you open up an entire new world to your subconscious. So facing the unknown, stepping into it and surviving it. I can't really tell you a more powerful technique on the psychological level. If you can become the kind of person who wakes up every day and says, you know, I'm just going to be like an acrobat, and my acrobatics involves stepping into the unknown every day. But when you do that, you should stay awake and mindful to see what states you go through as you try the unknown. Because you see, if you go into a fear state and you don't catch yourself, then the exercise is futile. The exercise is to step into the unknown, monitor yourself, and if fear comes, face it and go beyond fear. Every time you break a habit, every time you step into the unknown, you are opening the subconscious up to the possibility of a new you. This technique will really make you grow much, much faster. If you make a resolve to continuously step into the unknown. Let's speak about thought and the nature of thought. As far as yoga is concerned, thought is an impermanent bubble. It's almost insulting that yoga really doesn't pay much respect to a bubble of thought. They treat it as impermanent energy. This is why if you're truly a meditator, you will learn not to pay that much attention to your thoughts. And then I'll ask all of you a simple question. Let's say you have a pretty challenging project coming up in the next 11 months. And then God gives you two versions of you. One version of you is analyzing, looking at the future, looking at past experiences, weighing the ups and downs, looking at the bank account, looking at the budget, and then going into this huge challenge. The other one knows what needs to be done on a daily basis and simply shows up. But what the second one is missing is fear, doubt, and anxiety. So which one do you think would get to the goal faster? The second one, huh? See, this is arguable because some people say, no, there's strategic planning. Worry sometimes helps me do a better job. A very calculating mind allows me not to make mistakes. But if you go back to the monumental things you've done in your life, anything that you've done that, according to yourself, has been monumental, you've never done those things with a calculating mind. The big things you've done in your life, like staying alive, raising 2 children, either going to medical school at the age of 48, rock climbing. All of those things you've done by simply showing up, being present, and relaxing your brain. Somebody may ask, Kambiz, in the absence of planning, how would a businessman run 15 companies? The yogic answer to that is, you keep your mind concentrated, still, calm, and all the creativity you need tomorrow will come to you today in the form of spontaneous right action. This I've witnessed myself. When I was in 2 years of silence, the mind becomes so still that anytime I needed a solution, it would spontaneously bubble up and present the solution to me. Every time. I'll give you an example. At some point, an accountant told me that I could have a $14,000 tax return, rebate, if I wrote to an accountant in Woburn, Massachusetts, who had done my taxes 7 years before. At that point, I was in Fairfield, Iowa. 7 years had passed. I had only used that accountant once. And I had no clue. I had no clue about the name of the town, so I couldn't even get the area code. I had no clue about his name. Nothing. It was a blank. And there was $14,000 at stake. I went into a meditation. As my mind started to empty out, I saw a Woburn. And then, as I stayed in meditation, the area code flashed by. I saw a parentheses, 3 digits, closed parentheses. I saw that in my meditation. As the meditation went on, I saw his last name. So I came out of meditation, called, let's say, 508-555-1212. I said, CPA, such and such. They immediately gave me the number. I called him, he found my file in 10 minutes. So I'm telling you the truth, I had no idea about the town, the area code. 7 years had passed. So this is how powerful the subconscious is in recalling. That was an instant when the intellectual mind could not render the information. Use your meditation to remember things. It will give you information. Especially if you ask your subconscious mind, right before sleeping, go to your subconscious, say, dear subconscious, I must remember this fellow's name by morning when I wake up. And the computer of the subconscious will work all evening to retrieve it. Going back to the nature of thought. Thought is never about now. Anytime you think, it's either about the future or the past. There's no such thing as having thought in the present. Another piece of advice to you, don't try to solve your life's problems by thinking. Because when you think, you simply have more thoughts. So what does a meditator do? A meditator goes to the source of thought. What is the source of thought? It is the gap between two thoughts. So what I'm really saying is, let's say you're looking for a solution. When you overanalyze, you simply have more thoughts. You can't solve the problems of the mind at the level of the mind. You had a particular meditation, you came out, and you made an important real estate decision. It was very clear. Whereas the intellectual mind was banging against walls and not coming to a decision. Like that. So when you try to solve big problems from the level of the mind, and you start to think, you simply have more thoughts. You need to go to the source of thought. The source of thought is the gap between two breaths and the gap between two thoughts. In that gap is where you'll find the creativity. Another thing I'll tell you is, you are thoroughly convinced that you have a life story. What yoga will tell you is, your life story is a number of pictures stored in your memory that you've pasted together in the form of linear time to construct your own version of my life story. Which is fine, you know, nothing wrong with stories. The problem with stories in the world of psychology is that when you construct your own story and you don't lend the greatest meaning to that story, then you wind up spending 8 years curing your psychological wounds. Whereas right from the start, it was a story that was woven. This is why two sisters will rarely give the same account of their father while they were growing up. Very, very rare. If you ask three siblings, how was your childhood? What was the atmosphere at home like? You rarely get the same story. So I'm going to say goodbye now, and we'll resume later. Talks about the human mind and thought.